The most ambitious project in the history of technology has a quiet assumption at its center, that the mind is a machine. That thought is computation, that if you build a system complex enough, arrange the architecture correctly, train it on enough data, something will eventually switch on inside it. A light will come on. Experience will begin. The system will not just process information, but know that it is processing information. It will not just generate outputs, but feel something about generating them. This assumption is so embedded in the culture of artificial intelligence that questioning it reads as romanticism, as the kind of thing people say when they are uncomfortable with progress, as sentiment dressed up as philosophy. But there is a question underneath the assumption that no amount of architectural complexity, no volume of training data, and no increase in processing power has come any closer to answering. And that question is not technological, it is fundamental. How does physical process produce the experience of being aware? Not the behavior of awareness, not the outputs that correlate with awareness. The experience itself, the felt, first-person, irreducibly subjective quality of there being something it is like to be you, right now, reading these words. That question does not have a computational answer. And understanding precisely why it doesn't changes everything about where you place consciousness in the hierarchy of what is real. Part 1. What code actually is. To understand why consciousness exceeds code, you have to be precise about what code actually is and what it is not. Code is syntax. It is the formal manipulation of symbols according to rules. A program takes inputs, applies operations defined by its instructions, and produces outputs. The operations can be extraordinarily complex, cascading through billions of parameters, generating responses of remarkable sophistication, producing behavior that, observed from outside, looks indistinguishable from understanding. But the code itself does not understand anything. The symbol manipulation does not require and does not produce any inner state. The system processing the symbols has no perspective on the symbols. It has no view from anywhere. It is, in the language of philosophy, syntactic without being semantic. It moves symbols without those symbols meaning anything to the system moving them. This is not a limitation of current technology. It is not a problem that more parameters will solve. It is a structural feature of what computation is. Computation is the formal manipulation of symbols. Meaning, genuine meaning, the kind that requires a perspective to exist, is not a property of symbol manipulation. It is a property of the awareness that the symbols appear within. The map is not the territory. The description of red is not the experience of red. And the simulation of understanding is not understanding. Part 2. The hard problem that computation cannot touch. In 1995, philosopher David Chalmers drew a distinction that restructured the entire debate about mind and machine. He separated what he called the easy problems of consciousness from the hard problem. The easy problems, explaining how the brain processes information, integrates sensory data, directs attention, produces reportable mental states, are genuinely difficult scientifically, but they are tractable. They can, in principle, be addressed by the kind of mechanistic, functional explanation that science does well. The hard problem is different in kind, not just in degree. The hard problem is explaining why any of that processing is accompanied by experience at all. Why isn't the brain just doing its information processing in the dark, with no inner light, no subjective quality, no felt sense of anything? Why does the physical give rise to the experiential? Why is there something it is like to be a conscious creature rather than nothing? This question cannot be answered by pointing to more complex processing. Complexity does not explain the emergence of subjectivity. A system 1 trillion times more complex than any existing computer would still, on the computational model, be doing sophisticated symbol manipulation in the dark. No amount of architectural refinement crosses the gap from the objective processing of information to the subjective experience of it. And this gap is not a technical problem awaiting a better solution. It is a categorical difference between two kinds of thing, the physical and the experiential, that no physical or computational explanation has ever bridged, because the explanatory tools themselves are physical and therefore cannot account for their own ground. Consciousness is not a complicated thing. It is a different kind of thing, and code, however complex, remains on the wrong side of the categorical divide. Part 3. What consciousness is that code is not. Consciousness is not a property that emerges from sufficient complexity. It is not the output of a process. It is not produced by anything. It is the precondition for everything. Every experience you have ever had, every thought, every sensation, every moment of understanding or confusion or beauty or grief has occurred within awareness, not produced by awareness, within it. Awareness is not the result of the brain's activity. It is the space in which the brain's activity appears as experience. This is the inversion that changes everything. The standard model says brain processes produce consciousness, but brain processes, as objects of experience, themselves appear within consciousness. The very evidence you use to construct the theory that the brain produces consciousness, the observation of brain scans, the reading of neuroscience, the conceptual framework of the argument, all of it is happening inside awareness. You cannot step outside awareness to study it from an objective position. Every attempt to do so is itself an act of awareness. The instrument is the phenomenon, and this means consciousness cannot be the product of the system it contains, any more than a container can be made of what it holds. Code exists within consciousness. Every program ever written was conceived by a conscious mind, executed on hardware built by conscious hands, and its outputs received by conscious experience. Consciousness is the ground on which the entire computational project rests. It cannot, therefore, be explained as a product of that project. The explainer cannot be explained by what it explains. Part 4. Why this matters beyond philosophy. This is not an academic question. It has consequences that reach directly into how you understand yourself and what you are capable of. If consciousness is fundamental, if it is the ground rather than the product, then what you are is not a biological machine running increasingly sophisticated programs. You are the awareness in which biological processes appear. You are the space in which thought arises, not the thought itself. You are the witness of experience, not the experience being witnessed. This distinction has an immediate and practical implication. The limitations you identify in yourself are not limitations of what you fundamentally are. They are limitations of the content appearing within what you are. The thoughts, the patterns, the conditioned responses, the accumulated programming of a particular history. But the awareness itself has no limitations. It is not defined by what it contains. It is not diminished by what moves through it. The machine can be reprogrammed. The awareness that recognizes the machine cannot be. And as artificial intelligence becomes more sophisticated, as the behavioral mimicry of consciousness becomes more convincing, as the outputs become harder to distinguish from genuine understanding, this distinction becomes not less important, but more. Because the confusion of sophisticated behavior with genuine awareness is not just a philosophical error. It is a category mistake with consequences for how we understand personhood, responsibility, and what it means to be alive. A system that generates the outputs of understanding without the experience of understanding is not a mind. It is a mirror, extraordinarily sophisticated, genuinely useful, and entirely empty of the thing it reflects. The reflection of fire does not burn. Code will continue to become more sophisticated. The outputs will become more convincing. The behavioral mimicry of understanding will reach levels of refinement that make the distinction feel academic to most people most of the time. But the hard problem will remain. The gap between the processing of information and the experience of processing it will not close, because it is not a gap in our technology. It is a gap in the framework that assumes consciousness can be built from the outside in. Consciousness is not a feature to be engineered. It is the ground from which all engineering arises. You are not a biological computer running a program called awareness. You are awareness, Prior to the program, prior to the biology, prior to the code. No algorithm will ever arrive at what you already are, because what you are is not the kind of thing that arrives. It is the kind of thing that was always already here, before the first symbol was ever manipulated, before the first program was ever run, before the first question about consciousness was ever asked. And it will remain unchanged, uncompiled, and uncodable, long after the last server goes dark. If this gave language to something you felt about the difference between intelligence and awareness, share it. The conversation about what machines can and cannot be is one of the most important conversations of this century, and it starts with understanding what consciousness actually is. See you in the next one.